Chapter 3. Are your thoughts about dating holding you back? Madison and Ethan ran into each other when dropping the kids off for day camp. They chatted about the plans for the upcoming weekend. Madison said she was taking her kids to the zoo, and Ethan said he was starting to train for a half marathon. Madison, a 39-year-old single mother of two, hadn't been on a date since her divorce was finalized a year and a half ago. Her husband, John, had begun a new relationship several months after he separated from her and recently married the woman he had begun dating. Madison felt betrayed that he had moved on so quickly and easily. Ethan was a single dad and had never been married. He thought Madison was a wonderful mom and found her intriguing. Every time he saw her, he tried to find a way to talk with her. As Madison stood and chatted with Ethan, she thought to herself how pleasant he was to talk to and how she'd like to be around him more. Nonsense. She automatically reprimanded herself. Ethan is just being friendly. He doesn't want to date a divorced single mom. Then Ethan said, "Well, I hope you have fun at the zoo. You should check out the marathon info and think about signing up. We all train together, and it's a great experience." Madison felt uncomfortable and her heart had started racing. She wasn't sure what was happening. Was Ethan just being polite, or did he want to find a way to spend time with her? She didn't want to read too much into his comment for fear of embarrassing herself. She thought it best to brush it off, rather than seeming eager or possibly misinterpreting his intent. So she said, "Oh, okay. Sure," and abruptly turned to leave. Even though Madison was drawn to Ethan, she tended to get caught up in anxious thoughts about dating, and these thoughts had popped up during the conversation. "No one wants to deal with my baggage. I'm emotionally damaged and hurt from my divorce. There are no good men out there. Even the ones who seem kind will only hurt me. I don't know if I'll ever find love again. I had my one shot at love with my husband, and it didn't work out. Maybe love just isn't in the cards for me." Because Madison bought into her thoughts and acted accordingly, she was unable to respond to Ethan in a way that might have led to a friendship or romantic relationship. Instead, she withdrew. And although Ethan was confident and persistent, he eventually got the message and stopped trying to get to know her. The thoughts you have about yourself, dating, and others can play a huge role in preventing love from entering into your life. This chapter will help you start relating to your thoughts in a new way. Rather than viewing them as absolute truths, you'll learn to gain some distance from them and a new perspective on them. Understanding anxious thoughts. Our thoughts are a continual stream of words that help give meaning to the world around us and help us make sense of our experience. They're a running commentary that we each have inside our heads. One effect of anxiety and shyness is that your thoughts become hypercritical, hyperaware, and sometimes intrusive. Anxiety can also make your thoughts more extreme, or black and white. Sometimes anxious thoughts are rational, but often they aren't. The difficulty is, anxious thoughts feel full of meaning and induce a sense of dread. The threat feels very real. So having the anxious thought "I can't go on this date" may bring up such powerful feelings that you truly believe you can't go on the date. One of the keys to getting past anxiety is being able to see that the thoughts in your mind don't always accurately reflect what's happening in the outside world. They are just one interpretation of events, sort of like a commentator reporting on a political debate. Of course, the commentary differs depending on the political affiliation of the commentator. In much the same way, your thoughts are probably at least a bit biased based on the experiences you've had in the past. This bias becomes problematic when anxious thoughts are so pervasive and strong that they take control of how you respond to situations. Diffusing from anxious thoughts. Cognitive diffusion is the process of bringing awareness to thoughts and detaching from them so that they don't rule your behavior and, in the case of negative thoughts, don't produce or intensify negative feelings. Diffusion allows you to see your mind as a machine that produces thoughts. From this perspective, you don't have to attach excessive significance to those thoughts or view them as literally true. An important part of diffusion is recognizing that you can't always change what your anxious thoughts say. They're likely to pop up regardless of whether you try to stop them. I shouldn't have said that, I won't fit in, she's way out of my league, coming here was a huge mistake, I can't handle group settings, I really hate dating, and on and on. But what you can control is how you respond to these anxious thoughts. Do you believe them? Do they upset you? Do you act on them? In other words, do your anxious thoughts lead to an anxious behavior? When you're feeling highly anxious, it's easy to relate to your thoughts as if they were actual real-life events, rather than recognizing them for what they're, just thoughts. For example, say you see someone you like on an online dating site and decide to send a message. Immediately after you hit send, you have the thought, oh no. That was a really stupid message and she's going to hate it. I blew it. This is just a thought, it may or may not be true, and it probably isn't the exact response the person will have to reading your message. But if you're fused with your thought, you'll have the same emotions and feelings as if the person had in fact read the email and replied, this is a really stupid message. You blew it. Similarly, if you're having a panic attack and you're fused with the thought I'm having a heart attack, you'll experience the same level of fear you'd have if you truly were dying from a heart attack. When you're able to recognize that your thoughts are separate from the events they refer to, you can more easily accept your thoughts for what they're, passing thoughts, no more, no less. This is cognitive diffusion, and the exercises in this chapter will help you learn to do just that. Handling anxiety. About anxiety symptoms. Thoughts about physical symptoms of anxiety, and particularly whether they're visible to others, can be preoccupying and distracting. Am I blushing? Is my voice shaking? Oh, my palms are starting to sweat. My anxiety is really starting to show. In addition, you may heighten these symptoms by constantly monitoring what's happening around you, scanning for warning signs of potential embarrassment. Is everyone in the group getting along but me? Do I fit in? Is he trying to avoid talking to me now because of how awkward I'm acting? Paying close attention to physical symptoms of anxiety, blushing, sweating, shaky voice, rapid heartbeat, and so on, is understandable. You may hope that by doing so you can prevent your anxiety from growing. Unfortunately, what happens is just the opposite. Constant monitoring makes small signs of anxiety seem bigger or more frequent and makes you even more anxious. It's like a snowball rolling down a hill, with one anxious thought leading to another and overall anxiety gaining momentum and getting larger. Exercise. Becoming a distant observer. A helpful approach to hyper-awareness of anxiety symptoms is to observe yourself as you monitor your own thinking process. Hayes 2005. Instead of responding to your thoughts with more anxious thoughts, take the stance of being a distant observer. As a distant observer, you can be aware of when you start to notice your anxiety symptoms without buying into your anxious thoughts. This exercise will help you develop that perspective. Try it the next time you notice physical symptoms of anxiety and nervousness about them. Here I'll use blushing as an example. When you feel yourself blush, you might normally have a thought like, my cheeks are bright red. This is awful. Everyone knows I'm embarrassed. Instead, observe your reaction as if from a distance, saying to yourself, I'm having the thought that it's awful to blush and have people know I'm embarrassed. Rather than placing a judgment on your experience, it's bad to blush, people shouldn't know I'm embarrassed, simply note the experience without judging it. Blushing becomes just blushing, neither good nor bad, neither desired nor undesired. Whenever you notice anxious thoughts emerging, use the format I'm having the thought that blank. For example, I'm having the thought that he's judging me, or I'm having the thought that I shouldn't be feeling this way. This phrasing creates some distance between yourself and your thoughts so they become less anxiety provoking. It helps you remember the difference between buying into a thought and just having a thought. Luoma and Hayes 2003. You may also notice that when you allow yourself to have a thought without buying into it, you begin to experience your interactions with others differently. You're freer to just be in the moment and experience the situation. You'll feel more comfortable about doing and saying what you really want to do and say because you have less fear of anxious and self-critical thoughts looming over you. Whereas blushing may have previously sent you into withdrawal mode, with diffusion you can give less weight to the thoughts provoked by blushing and move on with your conversation. This technique is helpful with any type of thought. I recommend practicing it often with difficult thoughts until it becomes second nature. Exercise watching the anxiety snowball. This is another exercise that will help you gain distance from your thoughts. It's a meditation technique I developed that helps you visualize the act of observing your thoughts as they pass through your mind. When you notice anxious thoughts feeding one another, gently distance yourself from the worry by saying to yourself, "There goes the anxiety snowball." Observe what the snowball of your thoughts is doing. For example, I can see my anxious thoughts building up and gaining momentum, or, now I see the thought my heart is beating out of my chest being added to the snowball. Continue to watch the snowball. Each time you have a thought, sum it up in a simple word, like anxiety, judgment, or boring. Place each thought onto the snowball. Notice which thoughts cause the snowball to grow. Don't try to block or resist the snowball by pushing the thoughts away. Simply allow your thoughts to come, and then gently place them on the snowball, watching as it becomes separate from you and rolls farther and farther away. Imagine that the snowball comes to a stop. The anxious thoughts may still be there, but you notice the snow starting to melt, your anxiety is dissipating and becoming less dense. As the snow melts, your anxiety-related thoughts hold less and less weight. This practice serves as another reminder that your thoughts are not you. You don't have to get caught up in the snowball of anxiety. Instead, you can just observe the snowball as it goes through the natural process of gaining momentum and growing, then slowing, stopping, and melting. Just like a snowball, your anxious thinking doesn't last forever, and it will eventually run its course. You'll notice that your anxious thoughts lose much of the power and momentum when you observe them from a more dispassionate perspective. Handling thoughts that lead to dating burnout. Dating burnout can happen after one bad date or after a series of unsuccessful dates or relationships. The common theme in dating burnout is an overwhelming feeling of wanting to give up, accompanied by thoughts like dating isn't worth it or love will never happen for me. If you've ever felt this way, you are not alone. And just the simple knowledge that you aren't the only one who feels this way can help you feel less isolated and sad. It's also helpful to know how anxiety and shyness can add to dating burnout. The purpose of anxiety is to help you avoid danger, hurt, or pain. Its job is to protect you. Therefore, your anxious thoughts will try to convince you of all of the ways dating isn't safe or isn't worth it, and that it's better to give up than to face another bad date. The depression that comes with shyness and anxiety can add to the sinking feeling that love will never work out for you. Dating, or the lack of dating, can definitely be discouraging at times. I don't expect you to deny how hard it can be. For instance, not hearing from someone you like can be painful. Allow yourself to acknowledge the feelings of being discouraged and hurt. At the same time, unfailingly accepting thoughts like "it will never happen for me" is a way in which thoughts get fused to your sense of self. Learning to detach yourself from these thoughts can help you recognize both that it's okay to feel upset and that you don't have to believe this holds any significance in terms of your actual dating prospects. Exercise thanking your mind. One way to get distance from some of your more discouraging thoughts is through the simple but powerful exercise of thanking your mind. Hayes 2005. Since your mind is trying to protect you from feeling worried, hurt, or disappointed, you can acknowledge its efforts and thank it for providing you with discouraging thoughts. When you notice a thought like "love will never happen for me," you can reply, "Thank you, mind, for trying to protect me by telling me that love will never happen for me." This is an effective way to remind yourself that you can have discouraging thoughts without buying into them. Understanding the roots of self-critical thoughts. Starting a new relationship often means being vulnerable. But when you don't feel good about yourself, it feels overwhelming and intimidating to open up. At the core of anxiety, there's often a deep sense of shame, a feeling that you're flawed or defective at your core. These feelings of shame often develop at an early age. Sometimes shame begins with being bullied or ostracized at school, which can leave a lasting feeling of being alone, defective, or an outsider. Similarly, parents or other family members may evoke feelings of shame in kids throughout childhood. For instance, your parents may have tried to teach you a lesson by saying something like, "Look what you've done to your sister. You made her cry." As a child, you probably didn't fully understand how your actions affected others. If you heard that you'd done something wrong without understanding why or how, this probably made you feel like you were inherently bad. Adults often talk about feeling unworthy because of childhood experiences in which they felt they somehow failed to meet the expectations of a stern, strict, or emotionally unavailable parent. A pervasive sense of shame can arise due to being neglected, abused, or shamed as a child. Zimbardo 1982. In addition, a deep sense of shame can develop in adulthood, brought on by being emotionally hurt by past partners. To some degree, everyone has experiences that can trigger shame. However, some people tend to respond to shame by turning their pain inward and becoming more focused on painful inner experiences. It's also common to feel self-critical about feeling shame. In this way, shame can become part of your self-view, causing you to see yourself as flawed and generating numerous self-critical thoughts. The first step in healing this sense of a flawed self is to acknowledge that, yes, people have hurt you, and that you didn't deserve this. Mean kids at school, family members, or former partners may have said or done things that made you feel inferior, but that doesn't mean you're inferior, weak, defective, or broken. The second step is to break the cycle of self-critical thoughts in response to feelings of shame. To do so, it's crucial to respond to harsh, critical thoughts about yourself with a non-judgmental compassion. Gilbert and Proctor 2006. Exercise reframing your perspective on your past. This exercise will help you form a new relationship with painful past experiences and allow you to move on. In this approach, you extend self-compassion and acceptance to self-critical thoughts and feelings. Self-compassion means approaching yourself with caring, nurturing, and loving kindness, and as discussed, acceptance means being able to recognize that there are certain things you can't change, including the past. Rather than responding to shame with further feelings of self-loathing, you acknowledge the shameful feelings you experience and accept them without berating yourself for feeling the way you do. You're effectively ending the fruitless struggle to deny your experience and acknowledging your thoughts without over-identifying with them. Then, instead of fueling a cycle of shame, you can respond to shame with much-needed self-compassion. Take some time to consider the following questions, then write your responses in your journal. I've provided example responses from Christina, a 41-year-old mother of two who's been divorced for 1 year. Consider your personal history. What painful experiences have you had in relationships? List the areas of your life that bring up self-critical thoughts and describe those thoughts. Christina, my marriage and divorce from my husband bring up self-critical thoughts. I think I'm a failure because my marriage didn't work. I think there's something wrong with me because I couldn't keep us together. Identify the emotions you feel in response to these self-critical thoughts. Christina, I spend a lot of time feeling ashamed and regretting the years I spent with my ex, but not the fact that we have 2 wonderful kids. Mostly, I feel sadness and a sense of loss. Identify and describe a new, more compassionate perspective toward your emotions. It may be helpful to imagine a person who embodies wise, compassionate, and nurturing traits and how this person might respond. Christina, it's understandable that I'd feel sadness and a sense of loss after my divorce. I'm working toward finding compassion for my emotions of sadness. My divorce doesn't define me as unworthy or unlovable. I am a lovable, worthy person. Identify and describe a new, more accepting perspective toward your past experiences. Again, it may be helpful to imagine a person who embodies warmth, understanding, and acceptance, and how this person might view your circumstances. Christina, I can't change the past, but I can accept it and find a sense of peace and calm about my divorce. I can accept this as part of my history and acknowledge the pain that it has brought without turning that pain into self-critical thoughts about myself. For Christina, finding a new way of viewing her divorce was a healing experience. It allowed her to let go of her regret and see herself in a new light. Her divorce was part of her past, but it didn't define her. With time, she was able to let go of self-critical thoughts about her divorce, and this helped her feel ready and able to look for a new relationship. Completing this and other exercises in this book is an act that signifies your willingness to move in a new direction in life. Being willing to disengage from self-critical ways of thinking is one of the most important steps you can take. And as with acceptance, willingness isn't about being perfect and never feeling anxious. Rather, it's about taking a different stance toward your experiences, both internal and external, not getting stuck in self-critical thoughts, and extending loving kindness to yourself. What regrets are you ready to let go of? Dealing with overly self-conscious thoughts in dating. The way you talk, the way you dress, how you look, the kinds of questions you ask, the way you answer questions, the way you laugh, how you order a meal, what you choose to do on a date when you're shy and anxious, all of these are areas in which you may be particularly self-conscious and critical. Self-conscious thoughts often come out in a post-mortem, when you're reviewing a date or going over an interaction with someone after it happened. As you replay what happened, you may be highly critical of yourself. This is highly demoralizing, painful, and upsetting. People often have a tendency to criticize themselves through the eyes of others. Leary, Kowalski, and Campbell 1988. This is a form of mind reading, in which you assume you know what others are thinking and, in this case, that the thoughts about you are highly critical. You may assume that someone you like is thinking the worst of you, which heightens your self-consciousness and self-criticism. It also leads to self-blame, in which you assume a conversation or interaction didn't go well because of something you did or said. Indeed, research has shown that shy and anxious people tend to take more responsibility for negative social outcomes than those who aren't anxious. Hoffman and Teglassi 1982. Exercise, labeling self-conscious thoughts. In order to turn overly self-conscious, critical thinking around, it's helpful to label the types of thoughts you're having about yourself, using labels like judgment, evaluation, anxious thought, self-critical thought, and so on. To illustrate how to do this, I'll use Trevor as an example. He went to a party where he ran into Bianca, whom he'd been interested in for a few months. He'd been hoping to see Bianca and get a chance to talk to her again. But when he saw her at the party, he got nervous and waited until the end of the evening to approach her. They chatted and it seemed to go well. As she left, Bianca said, "Good to see you. Next time come talk to me earlier." When Trevor got home that night, he couldn't stop berating himself. What did she mean by that? I'm such a wimp, I should have talked to her sooner. Why did I wait so long? Was I staring at her all night? It must have been totally obvious I wanted to talk to her. I bet I seemed creepy to her. But Trevor had recently started working on learning to label his thoughts, and when he realized what he was doing, he tried that tactic, telling himself, "I'm having the critical thought that I'm a wimp, and I'm mind reading when I assume Bianca thinks I'm creepy." Labeling self-conscious thought processes in this way helps reduce their negative impact. Whenever you notice that you're being self-critical, use this technique to label your thoughts, then respond with compassion, as described in the next exercise. Exercise reflecting on your dating experiences with compassionate attention. I recommend doing this exercise after every date or significant social encounter you have. For the purposes of doing it now, recall a recent social interaction or date that elicited harsh, self-conscious, or critical thoughts about yourself, then take some time to consider the following questions and write your responses in your journal. I've provided examples from Todd, who was feeling highly self-conscious after a date with Simone. Write out an objective outline of your experience, what happened. Also identify your favorite parts of the experience and the most unpleasant or anxiety-provoking moments. Todd, I went out with Simone last night. I decided to take her to a French bakery since her mom is from France. She told me she loved the place, so it felt great that I had chosen well. I was really nervous at first, but after the first 10 minutes I started to feel okay. We walked around town after eating our desserts and had a good time talking. I made her laugh. That was my favorite part of the date. At the end, I tried to walk her to her car, but we got lost. I couldn't find the street the bakery was on, and it was super embarrassing. We found it eventually using her phone, but by that time I was flustered and felt like an idiot. Because I was thrown off, I wasn't able to keep talking normally, and I think she noticed. I had been thinking about giving her a good night kiss, but things got so awkward and I was stuck in my head, so I didn't try. List any critical thoughts you have related to yourself or your behaviors during that experience. Todd, I was kicking myself the whole way home. I shouldn't have gotten lost, it made me look stupid. And then I didn't kiss Simone because the moment didn't seem right, and I ruined the whole thing by being too much in my head. The perfect time to kiss her would have been as we were walking around town, laughing and talking. She was sort of looking up at me and slowing down, and that would have been the perfect time, but I froze up. Write an alternative response to your critical thoughts, using a perspective of understanding and kindheartedness, and gentler language. Todd, a kinder, more caring way to look at it is that no date goes exactly perfectly. Getting a little lost isn't going to make or break a date. I mean, if Simone liked me before, she probably wouldn't stop liking me just because of getting lost. And as for no kiss goodnight, there will be another chance to show her how I feel. Being physically affectionate is something that takes me a little time, but it's also okay to act on how I'm feeling in the moment. Write a compassionate response to any fears you may have about how the experience will affect the future, or describe what you learned from the experience. Try to phrase it in a positive, caring, and empathetic way. Todd, I'm worried Simone will think I don't like her, but I can show interest by calling her tomorrow to ask her out again. And next time, I guess I might remind myself that it's okay if things don't go perfectly, we can still have fun. I also want to work on being confident and showing her physical affection in those moments when it seems like we're both on the same page. By retelling your story objectively and noting your favorite and least favorite parts, you can get a more well-rounded sense of how the date went. Critical, self-conscious thoughts tend to mask everything else. The good moments fade away, and it almost feels as though they didn't happen. With this exercise, you see the full picture and your attention is drawn to the areas in which you interacted successfully. This exercise also reminds you to view your experience with compassion and to use less harsh, critical language when recalling your experiences, which is beneficial in many ways. Higher self-compassion is linked to increased connectedness with others, Neff 2003, higher levels of life satisfaction, Neff, Kirkpatrick, and Rood 2007, and lower levels of depression, Leary et al. 2007. Extending compassion to yourself is also a proven, effective way to reduce the negative effects of self-critical thoughts, Neff 2003. As you practice journaling from a caring, compassionate perspective after each date and significant social encounter, you'll begin to integrate this kindness into the way you think about yourself. In this way, you'll start emphasizing the best in yourself and in others, seeing the human condition of struggle, error, and shortcomings with kindness while also opening your heart to moments of happiness and contentment. Lifting the burden of expectations. In dating, there's undeniably a certain amount of pressure, and this can definitely fuel anxious thoughts. There's pressure, often self-imposed, to be witty, to keep the conversation going, to ask questions, to make fun plans, to look good, or to show your best self. All of those expectations can bog you down, create anxiety, and prevent you from truly being yourself on dates. I'll let you in on a secret, your date wants to impress you too. It's helpful to remind yourself that conversation is a two-way street. Half of the responsibility is the other person's. Imagine taking all of the pressure you feel and giving half of it to your date. Rather than focusing on high expectations of yourself, pay attention to your date. Get to know him, observing how he responds to your interests and questions, and see whether he's someone you'd like to get closer to and have fun with. Thoughts about how and where you should meet potential partners. Anxiety and shyness will try to dictate what you're comfortable with in terms of dating. I find that people who are shy or socially anxious are the most reserved in terms of how, when, and where they're willing to meet new people. I challenge you to let go of such rules and instead try to embrace new situations that may help you find someone you really care about. My client Addison, an attractive, bright, 29-year-old woman, had been single for over a year and a half after a long-term relationship. She was convinced that there were no good guys left and that it was virtually impossible to meet someone. She told me, most of my friends are either already in a relationship or married, or they're having just as much trouble meeting someone as I am. I'd rather not do online dating. There are too many weirdos there, and just looking at profiles makes me anxious and dizzy. And I don't want to do any of those just lunch or speed dating things. The only people who go to those are pathetic and lonely. I don't want to join a club or activity just to meet someone, that seems awkward. And I can't imagine asking my friends to set me up, because it's embarrassing to ask for that. Addison had a lot to offer a potential partner, but her thoughts about dating were getting in her way and preventing her from meeting new men. She was so fused with her thoughts and certain they were correct that she closed herself off to many avenues for meeting men. In our work together, I helped Addison begin to see her thoughts as simply one way of thinking about things, rather than an absolute authority. With time, this allowed her to try some speed dating and lunch dates, despite her thought only pathetic and lonely people do that, and it won't work anyway. Eventually, she set a goal of meeting a wide variety of men and regularly putting herself in situations where she might meet someone new, always safely, of course. When her anxious mind said something like the party will be too stressful and a waste of time or there aren't going to be any interesting men there, she acknowledged those thoughts and then went anyway. And as she increasingly understood that she didn't need to act on her anxious thoughts and rules about dating, she developed a mantra: a thought is just a thought, it doesn't make it true. By suspending her judgments, Addison gave herself the opportunity to try new experiences that she formerly would have avoided. When Addison employed her new mantra and became more comfortable socializing with potential dates, some interesting things happened. As she became more self-confident, she noticed that there were decent men who were interested in her online, through social apps, and at social events. Receiving attention initially brought up some anxiety for her, but she also found that the more she interacted with men who were interested in her, the less it made her anxious. In addition, she finally felt like she was doing something that gave her a good chance of meeting someone compatible. This brightened her spirits and made her more approachable. And when men did approach her, she found it easier to talk to them and be friendly. In time, Addison met someone she really liked, Landon. He was polite, considerate, funny, and attractive. They dated for over 7 months. In the end, they found that they weren't compatible for a long-term relationship, but by then, Addison had come to realize that there are indeed good guys out there. Landon wasn't pathetic, weird, or creepy. He was just a nice guy who wanted to meet a woman to potentially have a relationship with. So even though the relationship didn't work out, Addison felt that she was on the right track and making progress toward finding someone who would be a good fit. The judging mind. Right now you may be thinking, this Addison woman's story is nice and I'm very happy for her, but her experience is nothing like mine and doesn't sound realistic to me. I've been to parties and tried online dating, and the experience hasn't been good. You wouldn't be alone in having reservations about whether other people's experiences have much bearing on yours. But I'd like you to notice that this is a judging type of thought. In other words, this is just one way of perceiving and relating to Addison's story. You can notice your judging thoughts for what they're by saying, now I'm having a judgment about how likely it is that any of this dating stuff can work for me. By noticing that this is a judgment and creating distance from the thought, you can begin to see for yourself that thoughts don't have to predict your actions. Instead, you can bring attention to your judgments and then decide that, despite your doubts, you don't know for sure that some of the strategies Addison used won't work for you. You could decide that your thoughts don't have to dictate what you do and set up an action plan along these lines. Let your friends know that you're open to being set up on a date if they have someone in mind. Accept all invitations and attend all social gatherings you're invited to. Sign up for an online dating service. Actually go to the site and respond to messages you receive. Accept a few dates for coffee, even if you're not sure how they'll go. Attend the dates you agree to. Work to notice and diffuse from judging thoughts throughout the process. Depending on whether you want to dive right in or take small steps, you might start with steps 1 and 2, or you might just commit to steps 3 and 4. Either way, the eventual goal is to engage with the world around you as much as possible with the intention of not letting anxious thoughts get in the way. Part of what happens when you start to get some distance from your thoughts is that they have less power over you. Another part is that you begin to tolerate different outcomes. You start to care a bit less about what happens if someone doesn't call, since you no longer believe it means you're undesirable. You assign less importance to the actions of others because you recognize that your thoughts about what happened, such as he doesn't like me, I blew it, I'm not pretty enough, or he's too good for me, aren't necessarily accurate. You also begin to recognize that you may never know why a date didn't work out, but that it's okay to not have all the answers. And even if you like someone and it doesn't work out, you become more accepting. This flexibility allows you to consider the idea that one person doesn't define you, your dating potential, or your lovability. Lastly, and significantly, you begin to embrace your new, more flexible ways of thinking and act on them by making changes to your dating behaviors. In the rest of this chapter, I'll outline ways that you can increase the number of people you meet by increasing how comfortable you are initiating contact, responding to dating requests, and facing fears of any social mishaps that may occur. Initiating contact. My client Cameron, a 45-year-old divorced father, found the concept of dating again terrifying. He had married his high school sweetheart at 19, and she had been his first and only long-term relationship. He told me, I'm not good at initiating contact with women. I don't know how to show interest without coming on too strong. And I hate the idea of being rejected. Many shy people have similar struggles, feeling uncomfortable talking to new people, let alone being the one who initiates contact. Yet this is one of the best places to start following your desires rather than being ruled by anxious thoughts. You can initiate contact in many ways: striking up a conversation, giving a compliment, sending someone an email through social media, meeting someone at a sports event, introducing yourself to someone at a party, talking to the person next to you in line at the bank, and so on. The key is to take that first subtle yet significant action that shows someone you're interested. The nice thing about initiating contact with new people is that the risk is relatively low in terms of rejection. After all, if the person doesn't respond positively, you don't have a lot invested in the relationship, so it shouldn't be as painful. In fact, with meeting a new person, a more realistic expectation is that it very well may not work out. I recommend that you take as many opportunities to practice initiating contact as possible. The more you do so, the more skilled you'll become and the less pressure you'll feel. Plus, if you don't meet new people, it will be awfully hard to establish a relationship or fall in love. As I worked with Cameron, who worried about coming on too strong, we focused on how he could initiate contact in a way that was friendly and a little flirtatious but also played to his strengths. Cameron was a naturally funny guy, so he worked on using humor and lightheartedness when making contact with new women. He also set a goal of initiating contact with 1 to 3 new women each day, just to practice meeting women. He usually started in the morning at a coffee stand, where he would smile or say a quick hello to a woman while standing in line or waiting for his coffee. If she smiled back or said hello, he might respond with a casual, friendly comment. Next, he used his lunch break as an opportunity to initiate contact. He tried to make conversation with women in the elevator. If he went out for lunch, he'd chat with a waitress or hostess. In the evening, he might initiate contact with someone at the gym, such as a woman next to him on the treadmill, or he might say hello to a woman standing next to him in line at the grocery store. When doubts and anxious thoughts crept in during these overtures, Cameron took the stance of an objective observer and labeled his thoughts, then reminded himself that he was in control, not his anxiety. He adopted the mantra, "I refuse to let anxiety stop me from doing what's meaningful in my life." What was most important as he practiced making contact was that he remained true to who he was. Rather than trying to pretend to be someone else to meet the expectations he imagined women had, he focused on speaking to them in a way that genuinely reflected his personality. In time, he gained confidence and felt more comfortable expressing his personality and even his inner thoughts. He discovered the parts of himself that he liked best and shared them with women he was interested in. He told me, women may or may not like me, but either way, I'd rather have a woman like me based on who I really am. And in time, Cameron wasn't as nervous about coming on too strong. From all of his practice in initiating contact, he'd learned how to make subtle overtures that he was comfortable with. He'd also gotten good at telling whether a woman was eager to chat, a signal to move forward, or wasn't receptive. He noticed that some women were aloof and uninterested, but that others were quite receptive, smiling and seeming flattered when he talked to them. He found it refreshing to know that there were women who were kind and pleasant, and a few who definitely seemed interested in getting to know him. And most powerful of all, Cameron's fear of rejection had diminished significantly and no longer affected his ability to reach out to people. Exercise practicing making contact. You can work on getting more comfortable making contact with others by setting a goal similar to Cameron's, initiating interactions with others on a regular basis. These need not be people you're interested in romantically, and you can choose people of any gender for this practice. Here are some daily or weekly goals you might choose. Smile and make eye contact with 3 people each day. Smile and say hi to everyone you pass during a half-hour walk. Say hello and make a conversational remark to someone waiting next to you in line. Approach someone who's walking a dog and ask if you can pet the dog. Have one conversation with a stranger each day, a mechanic, waiter, clerk, barista, or florist, anyone you come into contact with during your day. Once you've completed your goals for a week or 2, begin to focus these interactions on people you're attracted to or potentially interested in. Applying the same principles, continue to approach the interactions in a light-hearted, casual way. Being receptive to contact. Many women, and some men, prefer not to initiate contact and would rather wait for someone who's interested to approach them. If this is true for you, you'll want to work on being receptive to outreach from others and finding ways to increase opportunities for others to initiate contact. This requires that you notice when others are sending you signals that they're interested, and that you be open to their outreach, if you are indeed interested. So when someone strikes up a conversation with you, contacts you online, or generally shows interest in you, don't let your shyness or anxiety make you appear uninterested or aloof. Many of my shy clients say they aren't very comfortable receiving attention, especially initially. Unfortunately, this can keep them from showing when they like someone. Increasing receptive behaviors. However, you can start to show interest while also staying true to who you are, shyness and all. My client Lily, a young woman in the field of computer engineering, provides a good example. Because her shyness and anxiety caused her to feel uncomfortable with new people, she responded by saying very little. Many of her friends had told her that she seemed distant and aloof when they first met her. Likewise, men have thought she was snobby or cold, when in reality she's a very tender, warm-hearted person. But even when she wanted to talk to a potential love interest, she wasn't sure how to proceed. For a while, she had been particularly interested in Elijah, a man who lived a few doors down in her apartment building, and she was fairly certain that he liked her. They often talked by the mailboxes, and Elijah offered to help her with small chores and such, but Lily didn't let the conversations go on too long. Lily discussed her interactions with Elijah in session. She realized that she tended to cut off the conversations, leading to fewer interactions with him even though she wanted to talk more. Lily said she liked Elijah but wasn't sure how to convey that to him. We discussed strategies she could implement during the conversations to show her interest in small ways. She started by not ending the conversations so quickly. She also began asking Elijah more questions about himself and accepted his offer to help her carry in her groceries. She showed interest by allowing herself to enjoy his company, and in time, she started feeling more comfortable around him. One day when he flirted with her, she allowed herself to be flattered and she smiled, which also showed her interest. At the end of that conversation, Elijah asked Lily to go out with him the next weekend, and she accepted. In session, we discussed how she felt about accepting the date offer. Even though the prospect of going out with Elijah made her nervous, she resisted her initial urge to say no because she knew she liked him. She chose to accept some of the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings associated with the date in order to gain the opportunity to spend more time with Elijah. Another way to think about showing interest is to ask yourself, if I had a magic wand that made all of my anxiety disappear, how would I respond to this situation? What would I want to or say if anxiety weren't an issue? Hayes 2005. The goal is to have your outside behaviors match your values, what you really care about in life. It's a good way to gauge when it's time to accept your anxiety in order to follow your desire to get to know someone. Being receptive without being overeager. As you begin to respond to others' overtures, you may wonder how you can show interest without feeling too vulnerable or eager. This was definitely an issue for Melinda, a 25-year-old nursing student, who came to see me after a fairly new boyfriend, Nolan, had broken up with her. She had always been shy, so she usually waited for men to ask her out or make the first move. But once they did, she often found herself becoming very interested, very fast. Her anxiety made it hard for her to take it slow. She'd met Nolan through an online dating site, and once they started seeing each other, she always made sure she was available when he wanted to get together. She wanted to see him, and she worried that if too much time went between dates, he'd lose interest. Soon she started sending him text messages or Facebook messages the day after the dates, often asking when she'd see him again. But Nolan wasn't asking her out as frequently, and she felt like he was losing interest in her. This made her even more anxious and eager to please him, and she ended up feeling on edge when they were together, trying to do and say the right things to make him like her. She bought gifts for him and drove out of her way to go see him. Before long, Nolan stopped calling her altogether and didn't return her messages. Then, a few weeks later, he told her he wasn't ready for a committed relationship. That's when Melinda came to see me. This wasn't the first time this sort of thing had happened, and Melinda was worried that her eagerness was driving men away. As we began working together, it quickly became clear that her anxiety was behind many of her overeager behaviors. Her need to know when she'd see Nolan again arose from her uncertainty about how he felt about her. I helped her see that in the early stages of dating it's natural to have some uncertainty. It takes time to get to know one another and see how things might progress. As Melinda learned to tolerate some of the anxiety and uncertainty that came from waiting to hear from men, she realized that she actually felt less insecure when her dating experiences were a two-way street. She gained confidence as she realized how good it felt to maintain her dignity in this way. And while she still showed the men she dated that she was interested in them, she was able to dial back her intensity level. Her new approach also allowed her to better gauge how interested her dates were in her, since she gave them time to reach out to her first. Coping with fears of social mishaps. Shy and socially anxious people often have elevated concerns about potential social mishaps, inconveniencing others, being seen as weird, being thought of as unintelligent, or being the center of attention and embarrassing themselves. Do any of the following worries sound familiar? What if I talk to her and she thinks I'm totally weird? What if I respond to his comment and he thinks I'm not smart? What if I talk to her and she finds it annoying and bothersome? These thoughts tend to be accompanied by predictions of catastrophe. I'll embarrass myself and it will be a disaster. A technique called social mishaps exposure can help. It involves intentionally creating and facing feared situations in order to learn that social mishaps don't lead to long-term, irreversible, or negative consequences. One study of social mishaps exposure, Fang et al. 2013, provides a good example how this works. One participant in this study was Mary, who had several fears relating to social situations. She was given an assignment for each fear. For example, for her fear of losing her place while giving a speech, she purposefully paused for more than 5 seconds in the middle of a speech. For her fear of being the center of attention and inconveniencing others, she interrupted a group of people at a restaurant and asked to practice a maid of honor speech. To target fears of being the center of attention and being seen as weird, Mary went out on the street while wearing bandages on her face and asked people if they were Carl Smith because his car was being towed. These kinds of experiments helped Mary see that no real harm came from doing these things, and by the end of treatment, her anxiety symptoms had decreased by almost 60%. Exercise practicing social mishaps exposure. When practicing exposure to fears, it's important to choose situations that provoke at least moderate anxiety and to stay in the situation until your anxiety begins to subside, allowing you to learn that the consequences aren't as disastrous as you fear. You may find it useful to do some exposures repeatedly, noticing how your level of anxiety tends to decline with each practice. You can conduct exposure to social mishaps in a variety of ways. Here are some suggestions, but feel free to develop and engage in your own exposure situations. Open an umbrella inside a public building and walk around. Do a cartwheel outside a movie theater. Then walk backward slowly toward the ticket line. Get in a crowded elevator and face the back of the elevator. Approach a group of people at a restaurant and ask if anyone has the time. When they answer, pause for 5 seconds, then say, "I'm late," and rush off. Head to a library or bookstore. Put a book on your head as you browse, holding it there for several minutes. Go to a restaurant at lunchtime and sit down at a table for 2. Tell the waiter you're waiting for a friend. After 20 minutes, go ahead and order and eat your meal alone. Go to a department store and engage a salesperson in a long discussion about various clothing items. Try on the clothes, ask about them at length, and then leave without buying anything. Go into a coffee shop wearing brightly colored, mismatched clothing. Order coffee and sit and read a newspaper or magazine for 15 minutes. At a bookstore, approach someone browsing the aisles. Ask for some book recommendations for a birthday present for your niece. Stand next to a post office and ask people where you can find a place to send a letter. Attend a movie dressed up as the main character. In a crowded park, walk backward for 30 seconds with your arms extended straight out at your sides. Slowly do a complete 360-degree circle, then do a jumping jack and continue on your way. The goal is to see for yourself that nothing awful happens with these behaviors. In fact, you might have fun or strike up an interesting conversation. In all likelihood, the worst that will happen is someone giving you an odd look. Typically, people either don't pay much attention to the behavior or are very friendly and helpful regardless. This technique works because, rather than avoiding embarrassing situations and the catastrophic consequences you imagine might happen, you face those situations and the fears associated with them head on. Most importantly, it helps you gain more freedom and flexibility in interacting with others. You also become less sensitive to other people's reactions. Instead of monitoring others for even the slightest hint of disdain or disapproval, you learn to accept what others think of you and feel less need for their approval. This is truly freeing. In dating, this will help you build confidence and become more open. Fear is replaced with confidence, caution is replaced with ease, and rigidity is replaced with flexibility. This sense of self-assuredness will enhance your ability to initiate contact or be receptive to outreach from others. Summary. This chapter discussed some of the ways thinking can get in the way of your dating experience and helped you discover how developing a new relationship to these thoughts can open you up to new, more flexible ways of interacting. It also offered strategies for acting on your desires despite your anxious thoughts by initiating contact, being open to contact from others, and overcoming fears of social mishaps. The next chapter will give you more strategies to increase your dating skills and flexibility by helping you develop your capacity for mindfulness. Being present in the moment will help you connect with yourself and also help you connect with your dates.